I found the first photograph while cleaning the attic. It was supposed to be a mundane chore, one I had put off for far too long. Dust coated everything, a reminder of years of neglect. As I sifted through old boxes and forgotten memories, my fingers brushed against a small, worn envelope tucked beneath a pile of yellowed papers. Curiosity piqued. I pulled it out and slid out its contents. The first image hit me like a punch to the gut. There was Megan, my wife, laughing in the arms of another man. The background was unfamiliar, suggesting a clandestine meeting far from prying eyes. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of rage and disbelief flooding through me. I dropped the photo and reached for another, then another, each one confirming the gut-wrenching truth. I had been betrayed. My hands shook as I fumbled with the last picture. There was no mistaking the intimacy, the stolen glances, the lingering touches. I felt like a stranger in my own life, everything I believed in crumbling before me. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the attic seemed to close in, suffocating me with the weight of her deceit. I staggered down the stairs, the photos clutched in my trembling hand. I had to confront her, to hear the truth from her lips, no matter how much it would hurt. When Megan walked through the door that evening, her smile faded as she saw my expression. I held up the photos, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "What is this, Megan?" Her face went pale, and she stumbled back, tears welling in her eyes. "John, I can explain." But I didn't want explanations. I wanted to know why she had done this to us, to me. As she stammered out her confession, each word cut deeper, like a knife twisting in my heart. She begged for forgiveness, her voice breaking, but all I felt was a cold, hollow emptiness. "I need time to think," I managed to say, turning away from her pleading eyes. Inside, a storm of emotions raged: anger, betrayal, and a burning desire for revenge. I knew I couldn't just let this go. She had to pay for her deceit, and I would make sure she did. That night, as Megan cried herself to sleep, I lay awake, my mind racing. I would make her fall in love with me all over again, only to shatter her heart as she had shattered mine. It would be a slow, calculated process. She would never see it coming, and when the time was right, I would execute my plan with ruthless precision. I stared at the ceiling, a grim sense of determination settling over me. The game had begun, and I intended to win. Megan would regret the day she ever thought she could betray me and get away with it. The next morning, I awoke with a grim resolve. Megan was already in the kitchen, making coffee as if nothing had changed. The sight of her, so ordinary and familiar, twisted my gut with anger and heartbreak. I had to confront her, but I needed to control my rage, to think clearly and strategically. I took a deep breath and entered the kitchen. Megan looked up, her eyes red and swollen from a night of crying. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand to silence her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and detached. She nodded, her expression a mix of fear and guilt. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I placed the photos on the table, spreading them out like evidence in a courtroom. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Megan's lower lip trembled. "It started a year ago. I didn't mean for it to happen, John. It just did." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to lash out. "Who is he?" "His name is Ryan," she said, her voice cracking. "He's just someone I met at work. It was a mistake, John. I swear it's over now." "Over?" I scoffed, shaking my head. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You destroyed everything we had, Megan. Everything." Tears streamed down her face as she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. "Please, John. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I made a horrible mistake, but I want to make things right. Please give me a chance." I pulled my hand away, her touch burning like acid. "You don't get to ask for forgiveness, not after what you've done." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. It took every ounce of self-control to keep my composure. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But a darker part, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, wanted her to feel every ounce of pain she had inflicted on me. "I need time to think," I repeated, standing up and walking out of the kitchen. I could hear her sobs following me down the hallway, but I didn't look back. I went to our bedroom and closed the door, leaning against it as the weight of the situation threatened to crush me. I had a plan, but it required patience and precision. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. Megan needed to believe I was willing to forgive her, to work on our marriage. Only then could I execute my revenge. I took a few deep breaths and composed myself. When I returned to the kitchen, Megan was still sitting at the table, her face buried in her hands. I walked over and gently lifted her chin, forcing her to look at me. "I can't promise anything," I said, my voice steady. "But I want to try. For us. For what we used to have." Her eyes widened in surprise and hope. "Really?" I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Really. But you have to promise me that it's over with him. No more lies, no more secrets." "I promise," she whispered, clutching my hand as if it were a lifeline. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I squeezed her hand, the weight of my true intentions hidden behind a mask of sincerity. "Okay, let's take this one step at a time." Megan nodded, a flicker of hope returning to her eyes. She had no idea what was coming, no idea that every step we took toward reconciliation was just a step closer to her ultimate downfall. The game was in motion, and I was determined to see it through to the bitter end. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in our home was palpable. Megan tried her best to mend the rift she had created, showering me with affection and doing everything she could to regain my trust. But my heart had hardened, and every smile she gave me only fueled my resolve to see my plan through. I spent long nights sitting in our living room, staring at the photos I had found, reminding myself of the betrayal. The anger that simmered beneath my calm exterior kept me focused. I knew what I had to do, and it started with making her believe that we could rebuild our marriage. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Megan tentatively reached for my hand. "John, I know it's been hard, but I want you to know how much I appreciate you giving us another chance. I love you more than anything, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work." I looked into her eyes, searching for any trace of deceit, but all I saw was desperation and hope. It was time to take the next step in my plan. "I've been thinking a lot," I began, squeezing her hand gently, "and I want to try to move forward. I want us to go on a second honeymoon, to rekindle what we lost." Her eyes lit up with excitement and relief. "Really? Oh, John, that would be amazing. Where do you want to go?" "I was thinking of a cabin in the mountains, somewhere secluded where we can focus on just us. No distractions, no reminders of the past. Just you and me." Megan smiled, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "That sounds perfect. I'll start planning right away." As she busied herself with the details, I quietly began my own preparations. I needed to make sure everything was in place for the next phase of my plan. The romantic getaway would be the perfect setting to make her fall in love with me all over again, only to crush her heart as she had crushed mine. The day of our departure arrived, and we packed our bags with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The drive to the cabin was filled with light-hearted conversation and nostalgic reminiscing about the early days of our relationship. Megan seemed genuinely happy, and for a moment I almost believed that we could find our way back to each other. But the memory of those photos kept my resolve intact. The cabin was everything I had promised, remote, cozy, and surrounded by breathtaking natural beauty. Megan's eyes sparkled as she took in the view, her face aglow with anticipation. "This is perfect, John. Thank you for bringing me here." I forced a smile, hiding the darkness that lurked within me. "I'm glad you like it. Let's make the most of our time here." Over the next few days, I orchestrated a series of perfect moments. We hiked through the forest, shared intimate dinners by the fireplace, and talked late into the night. Megan seemed to blossom under the attention, and her love for me rekindled with each passing day. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. "This has been wonderful, John. I feel like we're really healing." I kissed the top of her head, a bitter taste in my mouth. "Me too, Megan. Me too." In truth, each perfect moment was a carefully crafted lie, designed to build her trust and dependence on me. I needed her to believe that I was committed to rebuilding our marriage, so that when I finally shattered her heart, the pain would be unbearable. As the days passed, I watched her lower her guard, her laughter becoming more genuine, her touch more tender. She had no idea that every step we took toward reconciliation was a step closer to her ultimate downfall. One night as we lay in bed, Megan whispered, "Thank you, John, for giving us this chance. I love you so much." I wrapped my arms around her, my heart a cold, unfeeling stone. "I love you too, Megan. Always." With those words, I solidified her trust, knowing that the final stages of my plan were set in motion. Megan would never see it coming, and when the time was right, I would deliver the final blow that would leave her broken and alone. The game was far from over, and I was determined to win. Back from the mountains, we resumed our lives with a semblance of normalcy. Megan's demeanor was lighter, her steps more buoyant, her laughter more frequent. She believed in our reconciliation, that our marriage had been salvaged from the brink. But every tender moment, every act of kindness from her only fueled the fire of my hidden anger. I immersed myself in our relationship, showering Megan with affection and attention. I needed her to believe that I had truly forgiven her and that I was invested in rebuilding our marriage. This facade of reconciliation was crucial for the next steps of my plan. One evening, I suggested we host a small dinner party for our closest friends. Megan beamed at the idea, thrilled to show everyone that we were stronger than ever. The preparations were meticulous, with Megan planning the menu and decorating the house, while I handled the invitations and logistics. The night of the party, our home was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warmth of friendship. "To new beginnings," I toasted, raising my glass. Our friends echoed the sentiment, and Megan looked at me with adoration, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. But behind my smile, my mind was already plotting the next move. As the guests departed and the house fell silent, Megan and I stood in the doorway, waving them off. She turned to me, her face flushed with happiness. "Tonight was perfect, John, thank you." I pulled her into an embrace, kissing her gently. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's important to show everyone that we're committed to each other." In the weeks that followed, I intensified my efforts to make Megan feel secure and loved. I encouraged her to open up about her feelings and to share her thoughts and fears. Each conversation was recorded, and each text message was saved. I needed a mountain of evidence for the day I would reveal the truth. One afternoon, I suggested we visit a marriage counselor. Megan hesitated at first, but I convinced her that it was a necessary step in our healing process. The counselor, Dr. Allen, was a kind and empathetic woman who seemed genuinely invested in helping us. Megan poured her heart out during the sessions, expressing her guilt and her gratitude for my forgiveness. "John has been amazing," she told Dr. Allen. "I don't know how I got so lucky. I thought I had lost him forever." I squeezed her hand, feigning a look of loving reassurance. "We're both working hard to make this right." Privately, I began visiting a lawyer to prepare the divorce papers. Each session with the lawyer was a reminder of the end game, the cold, calculated steps I needed to take to ensure that Megan would be left with nothing. I documented everything: the finances, her erratic behavior, her admissions of guilt during counseling sessions. It was all part of the plan. One evening, as Megan and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she rested her head on my shoulder. "I feel like we're really healing, John. I love you so much." I kissed the top of her head, my heart a cold, unfeeling stone. "I love you too, Megan. Always." But my mind was focused on the final phases of my plan. The fake affair, the financial maneuvers, the public exposure. They were all pieces of a puzzle that would culminate in Megan's ultimate downfall. I started leaving subtle clues of an affair, planting seeds of doubt in Megan's mind. A lipstick stain on my collar, a lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume, late-night work calls that seemed too convenient. Megan's suspicion grew, her paranoia taking root. She confronted me several times, each accusation met with denial and a display of hurt innocence. "How could you even think that, Megan?" I'd say, my voice laced with feigned pain. "After everything we've been through, you still don't trust me?" Her guilt over her own infidelity made her doubt herself, and she would apologize profusely, convinced that her fears were unfounded. Each confrontation chipped away at her sanity, and I watched as she slowly unraveled. The pieces were falling into place. Megan was losing her grip on reality, her trust in me strengthening even as I manipulated her every move. The stage was set for the final act of my revenge, and I was ready to deliver the blow that would leave her broken and alone. In the quiet of the night, as Megan slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, a grim smile playing on my lips. The game was nearing its end. And soon, Megan would feel the full weight of her betrayal. She would regret the day she ever thought she could deceive me and get away with it. The ultimate revenge was within my grasp, and I intended to see it through to the bitter end. Back from the mountains, I delved into the next stage of my plan, gathering evidence. Megan, still riding the high of our romantic getaway, was oblivious to my true intentions. She thought we were rebuilding our marriage, but every act of kindness, every loving gesture, was a calculated move on my part. First, I needed more concrete proof of her affair with Ryan. The photographs I had found were damning, but I wanted a comprehensive dossier that would leave no room for doubt. I installed discrete cameras around the house, strategically placing them to capture every corner. Megan never suspected a thing, believing my increased interest in home security was just another step in our new beginning. Next, I hacked into her phone. It was easier than I thought, given her trust in me. I installed spyware that recorded her calls, tracked her messages, and even monitored her location. I spent hours going through her conversations, finding every scrap of evidence I could use against her. The messages with Ryan were particularly incriminating, declarations of love, promises to meet, and intimate details that made my blood boil. But I needed more than just digital proof. I started following her, documenting her movements. Whenever she went out, I made sure to be nearby, snapping photos and taking notes. It was a meticulous process, but the anger and betrayal fueled my determination. One evening, I followed her to a small cafe on the other side of town. She met Ryan there, their interaction confirming that the affair was far from over. I took dozens of photos from a distance, capturing their intimate conversation and lingering touches. It was exactly what I needed. I compiled everything into a file, a thorough, detailed account of Megan's betrayal. Photos, text messages, recorded phone calls, and surveillance footage. It was a damning collection, one that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind about her infidelity. While gathering this evidence, I continued to play the role of the loving husband. I attended counseling sessions with her, listened to her talk about our future, and made plans for our life together. The facade was exhausting but necessary. Megan needed to believe in our reconciliation, to think that I had forgiven her, and that we were truly moving forward. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me, her expression earnest. "John, I want you to know how grateful I am. I know it hasn't been easy, but your forgiveness means everything to me." I forced a smile, hiding the darkness within. "I'm glad you feel that way, Megan. I want us to keep moving forward, to build something even stronger than before." She kissed me, her eyes shining with love and hope. "We will, John. I know we will." But as I held her close, my mind was already on the next steps. The fake affair I had hinted at, the financial maneuvers, the public exposure, these were all pieces of a puzzle that would culminate in her ultimate downfall. Megan's gratitude and trust only made my resolve stronger. She had no idea what was coming. One night, as Megan slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The evidence I had gathered was just the beginning. The final phases of my plan were about to unfold, and soon, Megan would pay for her betrayal. I would make sure she felt every ounce of pain she had inflicted on me, and when the time was right, I would deliver the final blow. The game was nearing its end, and I was ready to play my last hand. Megan would regret the day she ever thought she could deceive me and get away with it. The ultimate revenge was within my grasp, and I intended to see it through to the bitter end. With the evidence of Megan's affair securely documented, it was time to set the stage for my own deceit. The fake affair had to be believable, something that would shatter her world as thoroughly as she had shattered mine. I needed someone who could play the part convincingly and discreetly. That's when I reached out to a former colleague, Laura. She was intelligent, beautiful, and most importantly, someone I could trust with the intricacies of my plan. Laura had left our company a few years back to start her own consulting firm, and we had stayed in touch sporadically. When I explained my situation to her, she was shocked but willing to help. "Are you sure about this, John?" Laura asked during our first meeting at a quiet, out-of-the-way cafe. "This is pretty extreme." "I have to be sure, Laura. Megan's betrayal was extreme. I need her to feel the same pain I did." Laura nodded, understanding in her eyes. "All right. What do you need me to do?" Over the next few weeks, Laura and I meticulously planned our fake affair. We set up a series of staged encounters, complete with incriminating evidence that Megan would eventually discover. We met at hotels, restaurants, and even at her office, ensuring there were enough public sightings to make the affair believable. I began leaving subtle clues at home. A lipstick-stained handkerchief was left in my pocket, an unfamiliar perfume on my clothes, and late-night work calls were all part of the ruse. Megan's suspicion grew with each passing day. One evening, as I returned home late from a staged dinner with Laura, Megan was waiting for me, her eyes red from crying. "Where were you, John?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "Out with a client," I replied, feigning innocence. "I told you I had a late meeting." "Don't lie to me," she shouted, holding up the handkerchief I had deliberately left in my pocket. "Whose is this?" I looked at the handkerchief and then back at her, my expression a mix of confusion and guilt. "Megan, it's not what you think. You need to calm down." "Calm down?" she echoed, her voice rising. "You've been having an affair, haven't you? After everything we've been through, you're cheating on me?" I sighed, looking down at the floor. "Megan, I can't talk about this right now. I need some time to think." I left her standing there, tears streaming down her face, and retreated to the bedroom. I could hear her sobbing in the living room, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was all part of the plan. Megan had to believe that I was capable of betrayal, that I was no better than she was. In the days that followed, I continued to play the part of the guilty husband. I avoided her questions, stayed out late, and left more clues for her to find. Megan grew increasingly paranoid, her trust in me eroding with each passing day. One afternoon, while Megan was out, I invited Laura over to the house. We staged a series of photos, capturing intimate moments that would be impossible to refute. I placed the photos in an envelope and hid it where Megan would eventually find it. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Megan seemed distant, her eyes haunted. I knew she was close to breaking point. "John, we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About what?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "About us, about what's been happening." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I know you've been seeing someone else. I found the photos." I stared at her, allowing a mix of guilt and frustration to cross my face. "Megan, I didn't want you to find out this way." "So it's true?" she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "You've been having an affair?" I nodded, looking away. "Yes, it's true, but Megan, you have to understand." "Understand?" she interrupted, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to me, John, after everything we've been through?" I stood up, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know, Megan. Maybe it's because of everything we've been through. Maybe I just couldn't move past what you did." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her, a cold satisfaction settling over me. The fake affair had worked. Megan was devastated, her world crumbling around her just as mine had. The next phases of my plan were ready to be set in motion. The public exposure, the financial maneuvers. It was all coming together. Megan would soon feel the full weight of her betrayal, and there would be no escape. With Megan reeling from the revelation of my fake affair, I knew the time was ripe to initiate the next phase, securing my financial position. Megan had been vulnerable, distracted, and emotionally devastated. It was the perfect opportunity to ensure that when the final blow landed, she would be left with nothing. I began by meeting with my lawyer, Kevin, who had been discreetly advising me throughout this ordeal. Kevin was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who understood the delicate nature of my situation. "John, we need to move swiftly," Kevin said as we sat in his office. "The financial adjustments must be made before Megan suspects anything." "I understand," I replied. "What do we need to do first?" Kevin outlined a series of steps. We would transfer the majority of our joint assets into accounts solely in my name. This included our savings, investments, and any other liquid assets. Additionally, we would arrange for a change in the ownership of our property, ensuring that Megan would have no claim to it once the divorce proceedings began. I started with the bank accounts, systematically transferring funds into new accounts I had set up under my name. I made sure to leave enough in our joint accounts to avoid immediate suspicion, but the bulk of our savings was now securely in my control. Next, I tackled our investments. I liquidated several of our joint stocks and reinvested them into my personal portfolio. I used a separate brokerage account, ensuring that the transactions were difficult to trace back to me. Each move was carefully calculated, each step designed to strip Megan of any financial leverage. I also made sure to transfer ownership of the house. Kevin had prepared the necessary documents, and I forged Megan's signature to expedite the process. It was risky, but Megan's mental state left little room for her to notice the changes. She was too consumed by the betrayal and the emotional turmoil to pay attention to our finances. One evening, as Megan sat in the living room staring blankly at the television, I approached her with a concerned expression. "Megan, we need to talk about our finances." She looked up, her eyes dull and lifeless. "What about them?" "I've been thinking about our future," I said, sitting down beside her. "With everything that's happened, I think it's important for us to reevaluate our financial situation. We need to make sure we're secure, no matter what happens." She nodded slowly, barely processing my words. "Okay, John, whatever you think is best." I squeezed her hand, feigning concern. "I'll handle everything, Megan. You don't need to worry about a thing." She managed a weak smile, trusting me completely. "Thank you, John. I don't know what I would do without you." Inwardly, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Megan was completely under my control, her trust in me unwavering despite the fake affair. It was almost too easy. Over the next few weeks, I continued to shift our assets, ensuring that Megan would be left with nothing when the time came. I even went as far as changing the beneficiaries on our insurance policies, removing her name and replacing it with a trusted friend. Every detail was meticulously planned, every move designed to leave Megan with no financial safety net. To further cement my position, I convinced Megan to sign a series of documents under the guise of refinancing our mortgage. She was too distraught to question anything, and her signature on those papers sealed her fate. With her name removed from the house, she would have no claim to our home once the divorce was finalized. As the days passed, Megan grew more despondent. The weight of her guilt, combined with the shock of my supposed betrayal, left her a shell of the woman she once was. I continued to play the part of the remorseful husband, offering support and understanding while secretly dismantling her world piece by piece. One night, as we lay in bed, she turned to me, her voice barely a whisper. "John, do you think we'll ever be okay again?" I looked at her, my heart cold and unfeeling. "I don't know, Megan, but I promise I'll do everything I can to make things right." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, John. I love you." "I love you too, Megan," I replied, the lie rolling off my tongue with ease. But love had nothing to do with it. The financial maneuvers were complete, and Megan was more vulnerable than ever. The stage was set for the final act of my revenge. The public exposure and the ultimate humiliation were all that remained. Soon, Megan would understand the full extent of her betrayal, and there would be no escape from the consequences of her actions. With the financial maneuvers completed and Megan left in a state of emotional and financial vulnerability, the stage was set for the ultimate act of revenge: public exposure. It was time to reveal Megan's betrayal to the world, ensuring that everyone saw her for who she truly was. I began by crafting an email to her closest friends and family. The message had to be perfect, a blend of hurt and betrayal that would evoke sympathy for me and shock and disappointment towards Megan. I included select pieces of evidence, photos of her with Ryan, screenshots of their messages, and even a recording of one of their intimate phone calls. The email painted a vivid picture of her infidelity, leaving no room for doubt. Subject: heartbroken and betrayed. Dear friends and family, I never thought I would have to write this email, but I feel you all deserve to know the truth. Megan has been having an affair for months, and I recently discovered the extent of her betrayal. This has been one of the most painful experiences of my life, and I am still trying to come to terms with it. Attached, you will find evidence of Megan's infidelity. Please understand that sharing this is not easy for me, but I believe you all need to know the truth. Megan has not only betrayed me, but also the trust of everyone who believed in our relationship. Thank you for your understanding and support during this difficult time. John, I hit send, and within moments my phone began to buzz with incoming messages of shock and support. Megan's friends and family were stunned, their disbelief quickly turning into anger and disappointment. The fallout was immediate and intense. The next step was social media. I posted a heartfelt message on my profile, ensuring that it reached a broader audience. I included some of the same evidence, making sure to protect Ryan's identity for the moment. The post quickly went viral, garnering an outpouring of support from friends, colleagues, and even strangers. Megan had no idea what was happening. She had taken a sleeping pill earlier and was fast asleep in the bedroom. I watched as the notifications flooded in, the comments pouring out a mix of sympathy for me and condemnation for her. The public exposure was working exactly as planned. When Megan finally woke up the next morning, she was met with a barrage of calls and messages. Her phone buzzed incessantly, the screen lighting up with names of friends and family members. She looked at me, confusion and fear in her eyes. "John, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. I handed her my phone, showing her the email and social media posts. Her face went pale as she read through the messages, her hands shaking. "Why did you do this?" "Because the world deserves to know the truth, Megan," I replied coldly. "You betrayed me, and now everyone knows what you did." She collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. "How could you? I thought we were trying to fix things." "I was trying to fix things, Megan, but you made it impossible. This is the consequence of your actions." As the days passed, the fallout from the public exposure grew. Megan's friends turned their backs on her. Her family expressed their disappointment, and even her colleagues began to distance themselves. She became a pariah, her reputation shattered beyond repair. I continued to play the part of the devastated husband, accepting the sympathy and support that poured in from all sides. Megan, meanwhile, withdrew into herself, her guilt and shame consuming her. She stopped going out, stopped answering calls, and spent most of her days in a state of despair. One evening, as we sat in the living room in silence, Megan finally spoke. "John, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this." I looked at her, my expression neutral. "What are you saying, Megan?" "I think we need to separate," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to get away from here, from everything." I nodded slowly, feigning reluctance. "If that's what you think is best, Megan, I'll support whatever decision you make." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. "Thank you, John, for everything." As she retreated to the bedroom to pack a bag, I felt a surge of triumph. The public exposure had worked perfectly. Megan was broken, her life in ruins, and she had no idea that the worst was yet to come. The final act of my revenge was approaching, and soon, Megan would understand the full extent of her betrayal. There would be no escape from the consequences of her actions, and I would finally have my justice. With Megan's life in tatters and our marriage on the brink of collapse, the time had come for the final act of my revenge, the confrontation. I had meticulously orchestrated every step leading up to this moment, and now I would confront Megan with the full extent of her betrayal. I waited until she had packed her bag and was ready to leave. She emerged from the bedroom, her eyes red from crying, her belongings hastily stuffed into a suitcase. She looked at me, a mixture of sadness and resignation in her gaze. "I'm leaving, John," she said quietly. "I can't stay here anymore. I need to get away from all of this." I nodded, feigning understanding. "I understand, Megan. Take all the time you need." As she walked towards the door, I called out to her, my voice steady and controlled. "Megan, there's something you need to see before you go." She turned to look at me, confusion clouding her eyes. "What is it?" I motioned for her to come closer, indicating the laptop on the coffee table. "I think you should sit down for this." Reluctantly, Megan sat down on the couch, her eyes fixed on the screen. I opened a folder containing all the evidence I had gathered: photos, messages, recordings. The truth about her affair with Ryan was laid bare in front of her. Megan's eyes widened in shock as she scrolled through the evidence, her hands trembling. "John, I don't understand." "You don't understand?" I repeated, my voice cold and calculated. "You cheated on me, Megan, for years, and you thought you could get away with it." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, John. I never meant to hurt you." "Sorry?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Sorry doesn't change what you did. Sorry doesn't erase the years of lies and deceit." Megan buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, John, please forgive me." But forgiveness was not on my agenda. I had spent months planning this moment, building up to the ultimate confrontation. I needed Megan to feel the full weight of her betrayal, to understand the pain she had caused me. "I don't want your apologies, Megan," I said, my tone icy. I want you to suffer like I did. I want you to know what it feels like to have your world shattered. Megan looked up at me, fear and desperation in her eyes. What are you going to do? I stood up, looming over her, my anger boiling over. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. I'm going to expose you for the lying, cheating person you are. Before she could respond, I grabbed my phone and started dialing. I called a few trusted friends and family members, inviting them over under the pretense of discussing our separation. When they arrived, I wasted no time in revealing the truth. I played the recordings, showed them the photos, and shared the messages. The shock and disbelief on their faces mirrored my own when I had first discovered Megan's betrayal. They turned to her, accusations and questions flying. Megan tried to defend herself, to explain her actions, but it was futile. The evidence was irrefutable, and her guilt was written all over her face. She collapsed onto the couch, overwhelmed by the weight of her actions and the public exposure of her infidelity. As the chaos unfolded around me, I stood back, watching with a sense of grim satisfaction. Megan's world had crumbled, her reputation irreparably damaged. She'd experienced a taste of the pain and humiliation she had inflicted on me. When everyone had left, and Megan sat alone in the living room, I approached her, my expression unreadable. This is the end, Megan. I want you out of my life for good. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. I understand, John. I'll leave. And just like that, Megan was gone. The final act of my revenge was complete. I had exposed her betrayal to the world, made her suffer as I had suffered, and ensured that she would never forget the consequences of her actions. As I stood in the empty living room, a sense of emptiness washed over me. The revenge I had sought for so long had left me hollow and alone. But in that moment, I also felt a glimmer of freedom. I was free from the weight of Megan's betrayal, free to rebuild my life without her deceit weighing me down. The episode had ended, but a new one was about to begin, and this time, I would be the author of my own story, without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. Months had passed since the dramatic confrontation with Megan, and the dust had settled. I had moved on with my life, rebuilding what was left of it after the storm of betrayal and revenge. Megan, on the other hand, had been left to face the harsh reality of her actions. It started with small things, her credit cards being declined, her bank accounts frozen. Megan had always relied on our joint finances, never questioning where the money came from or how it was managed. Now, without access to our shared assets, she found herself in a precarious financial situation. I had made sure to cover my tracks well, leaving no paper trail that could lead back to me. Kevin, my lawyer, had handled the legal aspects with precision, ensuring that Megan had no legal recourse to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. One day, I received a call from Megan. Her voice was strained, desperation evident in every word. John, I don't know what to do. My accounts are frozen, and I can't access any money. I listened silently, masking any hint of satisfaction. I'm sorry to hear that, Megan, but you know the situation. We agreed on the terms of our separation, and this is part of it. But I have bills to pay, John. I need money for rent, for food, she pleaded. I can't help you with that, Megan, I replied coolly. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Megan spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I understand. I didn't realize how much I depended on you. It's a tough lesson to learn, I said, a hint of bitterness creeping into my tone. But maybe it's one you needed to learn. The call ended shortly after that, leaving me with a mix of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I felt a sense of vindication. Megan was facing the consequences of her betrayal. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that lingered from our shattered marriage. Weeks passed, and I heard through mutual acquaintances that Megan had taken up a menial job to make ends meet. Her once comfortable life had been reduced to scraping by, paycheck to paycheck. It was a stark contrast to the life of luxury she had grown accustomed to. One evening, I received an email from Megan. It was a long, heartfelt message, apologizing for everything she had done, acknowledging the pain she had caused me, and expressing a desire for forgiveness and reconciliation. I read the email carefully, the words stirring conflicting emotions within me. Part of me wanted to believe that Megan had truly changed, that she regretted her actions and was willing to make amends. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, remained skeptical. I didn't reply to the email immediately, taking time to process my thoughts and emotions. Days turned into weeks, and eventually I sat down to compose a response. Subject: Re-apology. Dear Megan, I appreciate your apology and your acknowledgement of the pain you've caused. It hasn't been easy for either of us, and I'm sure we've both learned valuable lessons from this experience. However, I believe it's best for us to move forward separately. The trust that once existed between us has been irreparably damaged, and I don't think it's possible for us to rebuild what was lost. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and hope that you find peace and happiness. Sincerely, John. I hit send, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. The episode of my life that had been defined by betrayal and revenge was finally coming to an end. Megan had faced the consequences of her actions, and I had found a semblance of peace in letting go of the past. As I closed the laptop, I couldn't help but think about the lessons I had learned along the way. Betrayal had taught me the value of trust, revenge had shown me the futility of holding on to anger, and forgiveness had allowed me to finally move forward. The future was uncertain, but I faced it with a newfound sense of resilience and determination. I had survived the storm, and now I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had emerged stronger on the other side.